You ready?
Yeah. Is this us?
Yeah, this is it, Father.
No more coming, right. Wortley Top Forge is the last heavy iron forge in the country, still in place with its equipment in. And it goes back to sometime between 1600 and 1640. We know that by 1640 the forge is operating. And at that time there was a small forge there and an ironmaster's house there. And the setup was that they took the water from the river about a third of a mile that way, where there's a weir which sets the level of the water, and then brought the water along to the small dam which you'll have driven past as you came in. And then the river follows on and it goes right round the site and ends up down past that line of trees. So you've got a difference in the level of water which gives you the head of water that drives the water wheels, because this was always a water-driven forge. There were two major reconstructions over time. The first one was extending the forge to where that pillar is in 1713, and at the same time chopping the end off the ironmaster's house. And then in about 1845, 1850, it became as you see it now, and that was the last major reconstruction. Let's stroll down into the forge and you'll be able to see how I know it was reconstructed in 1713 because there's a stone on the wall there.
Yeah.
Okay. M.W. There was one Matthew Wilson, who was the ironmaster at the time. And you can also tell that they chopped the end off the ironmaster's house, because you can see But up there, there's still the plaster on his bedroom wall,
Oh yeah, you can see it, yeah.
where all they did was chop the end off to give them a bit more space when they developed in this direction. And you're seeing it from the 1850s, where there were two water wheels driving forging hammers, and one water wheel driving what was called a blowing engine that provided the blast of air for three furnaces, one there, one the front of which is there, and one over there. And they put the cranes in that manoeuvred the big lumps of iron between the furnaces and the hammers. And there's another one up here that swung to the furnace across here. In the late 1830s, they saw a niche market to go into, which was making railway axles. All across the country, there were hundreds and thousands of miles of railway being set down. And every railway needs trucks, every truck needs axles. So it was a growing market, and they decided to get into that. And so you see the hammers as they are now set up for forging axles. It was always an iron forge. We never used steel. Steel is what saw us off in the end. And it was wrought iron, which was pig iron, iron straight out of a blast furnace, hammered and heated to make it a usable commodity, because pig iron was absolutely useless. And so through the whole of its life, it was producing wrought iron, originally which would have gone to the local industries like the blacksmiths and the farriers and the wire makers and the chain makers, all using what was effectively the plastic of its day. And they also produced the railway axles from wrought iron because it had the major benefit that it would never break. It would bend, but it was very, very strong in construction because of the nature of the material. And we've got two radically different types of wheel. That one is the most efficient sort of wheel, which is called an undershot. The water is coming right on top of the wheel and driving it. This one is particularly well designed in that it runs anti-clockwise, so it effectively runs backwards, so that the water comes off it more efficiently. And that gives, from a wheel which is physically much smaller than the two you see over there, but was probably just as powerful and really good for the job it was put in to do. You've got this is our older water wheel, although it's a bit like Granny's broom. It's had 3 new heads and 2 new handles, in that it's been upgraded. It would originally all have been wooden, but as technology improved and they were able to make big castings, they could cast the wheel, and after that, when they could make big lumps of wrought iron, the axle became wrought iron, and so the whole thing lasted longer and didn't have to be maintained almost continuously. Although the basic frame that you see through here shows that originally it was a wooden frame with wooden frames. This would have been wooden at one time,
Yeah.
which you can tell because they didn't replace this bit. They just put lots of bits of packing in to save having to make a new centrepiece. This is a later wheel and hammer. Came in the rebuild in the 1850s. It's a bit wider than that one and a little bit less diameter, but they both produce about the same power, about 10 horsepower.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound a lot these days, but when a horsepower was actually a horse and you were working with the strength of a man's arm to do most of the work, a 10 horsepower wheel was a really powerful piece of equipment, and it was driving these hammers which it picked up and dropped as it went. Ran at 25 to 30 revolutions a minute. Was picked up and dropped 5 times per revolution, so you were getting 2.5 blows a second. Really powerful piece of equipment and perfect for making these things, railway axles. Let's carry on. You can see where the ironmaster's house was. It's the end of the building, and when they pitched that in, they built onto this end and produced 2 cottages, which were lived in until almost 1970. About 1968, 69, they were declared unfit for human habitation.
Yeah.
And people moved out. One of the reasons for that was there was no mains plumbing. And so Sheffield used to send a cart out every week with a man with a long shovel.
I wouldn't have liked to have done that job.
No, not a nice job at all. And so we've got these 2 cottages, but there's an extra add-on there. That brick building was built as the original offices back in the late 1700s, and my theory was that they were showing off because stone was cheap. There's a stone quarry just across the river.
Yeah.
It's there, but they chose to build in brick that was relatively expensive because there wasn't a lot of brick making clay locally, and I think they did it to say, we're doing really well, we're a really well established business, look, we can afford to build in brick. And when you get upstairs into the room upstairs, you'll see that it was panelled. It was like somebody's posh dining room on their estate, And that again was a statement of how well they were doing. They brought people in to negotiate. They negotiated from strength. We've got another range of buildings here, and they were the workshops. Back in the day, when something went wrong, you obviously couldn't call for a man in a white van to come and mend something. So you had to be ready to do it all on site. And so we've got the blacksmiths downstairs, 3 of them. I know this because there are 3 chimneys above their hearths. And then upstairs there were the joiners, because it was lighter carrying wood up the stairs than it would the metal the blacksmiths were working on. And that, you came in up that flight of stone steps there. And then the building on the end was a sort of storeroom. It was a bit like a barn, as you'll see when we get inside. This, I was saying, was the blacksmith shop. There's one blacksmith set up in the corner. There would have been another one there and another one in that corner. But it's become, over time, our restoration workshop. We've been here since the 1950s. And people started giving us machinery to help us mend things. And the equipment in here is of varying ages, from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s, and it's still our restoration workshop.
Yeah, I've seen it change over the years I've been coming here.
We're walking through a wall that would have been solid originally. This was a completely separate building, and you got into it through a big barn door there. You could see the arch over the door, and it's been bricked up over time. We don't really know what they use this for. We think there was some experimentation with making steel, because there's a building at the end there through that arch that has what looks like the remains of what was called a cementation furnace. That was a very early way of making steel. And we think they might have experimented with that back in the 1700s. There's obviously been different things. You can see there's a window up there. There's a strange little doorway there. There are post holes from what was probably a higher floor. So there's a story that we don't really know about this building. Although when we came, the roof was almost fallen in. That wall was bowed out about 4 feet. So it's been radically rebuilt, and it was rebuilt by our volunteers because they were told that they could bring their steam engines in if they mended the building, which they did. And we have this collection of steam engines, which are nothing to do with here. They're the collection of the society who own Wortley Top Forge. And then we're up into the joiner's shop. which again is a repository for our collections. But this is a major reconstruction. When we first came here, this building ended at the window bottoms, and it's all been built up from there. We were very, very lucky that we were given this roof, which is in itself a piece of history. It came from Jedediah Strutt's mill at Milford in Derbyshire. There's a photograph of it when it was in the mill there. And it's a very, very early cast iron fireproof mill construction. And down at the other end there's a date cast into there of 1817 that is very, very early. Yeah, 1817.
Yep. So was the slate originally with that as well, or is it?
No, they came from Sheffield
Oh, okay.
when they were knocking down all the little rows of houses up beside the Halifax
What about
Road.
the coffin?
What about the coffin?
Was it one ever used, or is it just for effect?
Yes and yes. There's a story behind it. My predecessor, a guy called Ken Hawley, who was the boss here, he was the custodian for 40 years.
Yeah.
And way back in the late 70s, he was in his late 50s.
Yeah.
And the joiner who was there said, "You're getting on, Ken. You know, you'll not
Yeah.
be here that long. I'll make thee a coffin."
So,
And he started making this coffin, and you'll see that it's not finished. See, the top board's never been cut to shape.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Because one Sunday Ken had a massive heart attack here.
And died, yeah.
No, he survived.
Oh,
He
right.
survived for another 30 plus years.
Oh, that's
he
good
didn't die
then.
until he was in his early 90s.
Oh, well, he lived a
But the
good life.
joiner never touched it again. And it's been up there ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah, he probably.
So it's a demonstration piece, but it has its own story.
Yeah.
And this is what will. It looks like an old type ladder.
Yeah. Called it Jacob's ladder.
Oh yeah.
And the ladder to heaven.
Yeah.
It was a very simple ladder that anybody
Effective.
could make.
Effective.
So
yeah.
you found a lot on farms for getting up into
Yeah.
the top of barns. The other great thing about it is you can have it vertical. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be.
Yeah. As long as it's held at the bottom and
Yeah, as long as it's
the
fixed,
top. Yeah.
you can have it vertically, which you wouldn't do with a standard runner's ladder.
Question I wanted to ask all the years I've been coming here is the sheep station, Australian sheep station. What's that about? Has that got anything to
It's
do
a
with Wortley?
salesman's sample.
Yeah.
There's a firm still in Sheffield called Bergen and Ball,
Yeah.
and this was Bergen's. Bergen's made,
Sheep shears.
but they also made bigger setups for sheep shearing. They made a steam engine
Okay.
and all of the bits and pieces and
Yeah.
cutters and all of the rest. And they had this made to take to